People pronounce the creator's real last name Garand. Debates about that still start wars in the comments. But what actually matters is why the Germans hated this rifle so much. Canadian-born John Garand walked into Springfield Armory in 1919. He faced one brutal enemy, not a foreign army, a cartridge, the .30-06. The military loved this round. It dropped targets at 1,800 yards. The bullet left the barrel at 2,700 feet per second. But that power demanded a massive price. How do you make a rifle reload a cartridge that breaks ordinary mechanisms? You use the energy of the shot itself. The .30-06 generated 50,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. That explosive blast simply tore fragile commercial mechanisms to pieces. Popular models like the Remington 8 only handled weak hunting rounds. Foreign military prototypes completely jammed. The new weapon needed a heavy steel bolt. It had to fly back and forth at huge speed without destroying the rifle. While commercial gun makers threw up their hands and walked away, Garand stood alone against the monstrous chamber pressure. He built a gas-operated machine. A tiny hole tapped the expanding propellant gases. They rushed into a cylinder under the barrel. The pressure shoved the piston back. The operating rod caught the momentum. The heavy bolt clanked open. It violently ejected the smoking brass. The mechanism chambered the next round. The action locked. The smell of burnt powder filled the air. The gas cylinder beneath the barrel grew blistering hot. Garand forced the rifle's own explosive energy to do the heavy lifting. By the early 1930s, this exact gas system crushed all competitors in the official military trials. To understand why Garand built a gas system from scratch in 1919, look at the First World War. American troops left those trenches with a massive disadvantage. An ordinary infantryman could only shoot as fast as his bare hands worked. Hear the frantic, metallic clank of the bolt-action Springfield M1903. Pull, push, lock, fire. Every manual cycle stole precious seconds while men died in the mud. The Army knew enemy machine guns completely outclassed their riflemen. They desperately needed a weapon that reloaded itself. No extra weight, no specialized crew, just relentless fire from a single soldier. And here is the absolute absurdity. The solution already existed. Civilian hunters bought semi-automatic rifles from Remington and Winchester back in 1905. The commercial market solved the problem instantly, but the military bureaucracy crawled. Generals sat in comfortable offices and let their troops freeze in time for decades. They clung to obsolete wood and steel. The top brass only moved when the tactical gap became completely undeniable. In 1919, the War Department officially signed the orders and launched the search for a self-loading service rifle. The search kicked off in 1919, but by 1930, the top brass marched right into John Garand's workshop. They brought their ledgers with them. Garand had a masterpiece ready. He built a smooth, gas-operated machine around a lightweight bullet, the .276 Pedersen. It fired fast. It kicked less. A soldier could carry way more ammo into the mud. In 1930, this lighter caliber crushed the formal trials. The board recommended it for combat. So why return to a heavy cartridge if the new caliber won all the tests? The answer is simple. Millions of free rounds in warehouses. The generals walked in, looked at the budget, and crossed out the new blueprints with a red pen. They ignored the perfect engineering. They cared about the bottom line. It was the middle of the Great Depression. Nobody wanted to fund an entirely new supply chain. Not when mountains of dusty wooden crates sat rotting in army depots. Inside those crates lay thousands of tons of leftover First World War ammo. The infantry expected the mobility of a modern lightweight round. Instead, the Army forced Garand to step backward and build his gun around the brutal recoil of their ancient stockpiles. He had to scrap years of work. He rebuilt the entire gas system from scratch just to handle the massive pressure of the old caliber. The final weapon was a compromise masked as a triumph. On January 9, 1936, the military finally adopted the modified beast. The accountants won. But this forced compromise still gave the United States a massive head start. While Europe clung to slow bolt-action rifles, America bet everything on semi-automatic firepower. By the time Pearl Harbor burned, the Army had already stockpiled over 150,000 of these new rifles. By June of 1941, factories stamped out 1,000 rifles every single day. The generals officially adopted the new rifle on January 9, 1936. But they forced one more compromise on John Garand, a controversial decision born entirely from paranoia. Army leadership was terrified of trench mud. They explicitly rejected detachable box magazines. They believed panicked soldiers would drop them in the dirt. They assumed an open magazine well would suck in debris and jam the action. It was a massive step backward. Across the ocean, the British Lee Enfield had already proved that detachable magazines worked perfectly in the worst European filth. But Washington refused to listen. So Garand had to adapt. He built a fixed internal magazine. It fed from a stamped steel en-bloc clip, a simple piece of metal holding exactly 8 rounds. Loading it was a brutal physical chore. You pull the operating rod back. The bolt locks open. You take the full clip and push it down into the receiver. You have to shove it hard. The heavy internal spring fights back, biting deep into your fingers as you force the cartridges down. Finally, a sharp click. You pull the rod slightly and let go. The steel bolt snaps forward like a bear trap. It strips the top round and violently slams it into the chamber. Every time you pull the trigger, the weapon cycles automatically. The follower inside the magazine rises. The next cartridge feeds. You fire again, round after round. Then comes the 8th shot. The follower reaches its peak. It trips the internal latch. The empty metal clip ejects straight up into the air with a sharp, ringing ping. The heavy bolt locked back. That empty steel clip for 8 rounds sparked the biggest Hollywood myth of the war. But for the men in the dirt, it delivered real, physical agony. One wrong move, and that heavy bolt slammed shut with the brutal force of an animal trap on inexperienced fingers. Could a German soldier actually hear that ringing empty clip and rush in for the kill? Only in the movies. Real combat is deafening chaos. That famous ping vanished instantly in the roar of artillery and crossfire. If one man was reloading, his squad was still pouring lead downrange. The myth looked great on the silver screen. The trenches told a different story. The actual danger lived inside the weapon itself. Enter the infamous Garand thumb. The operating rod hit a viciously powerful spring. You had to smash the ammo down and yank your hand away. Fast. Hesitate for a fraction of a second, and the mechanism engaged. The steel bolt snapped forward like a mousetrap. Recruits learned the loading technique the hard way. A smashed digit. Pulsating, blinding pain. A completely blackened thumbnail that throbbed for weeks. You either mastered the weapon quickly, or you bled. The bloody learning curve on the training ranges ended. In 1942, the military packed the rifles into wooden crates and shipped them straight to the real front. A slamming bolt and a steel clip looked great on a pristine training range. But the true value of the M1 Garand revealed itself only in seconds of survival inside a suffocating Pacific jungle. Why did the old veterans grumble about the new weapon? They firmly believed the complex automatics would just choke and die in the first muddy puddle. Reality hit different. A Marine lay flat in the dirt, his cheek pressed tight against the hard wooden stock. His finger pulled the trigger 8 times in a row. He never dropped the rifle from his shoulder. He never lost his sight picture. The heavy steel bolt clanked. Burnt gunpowder stung the nose in the suffocating tropical heat. Temperatures pushed past 100 degrees. He shifted his aim instantly. Next target. Next shot. The speed of aimed fire jumped 2.5 to 3 times. In close combat, that math was brutal and simple. It meant the exact difference between breathing and taking a Japanese Arisaka bayonet to the gut. The technical advantage translated directly into human blood. The military machine still stumbled. Clueless supply clerks accidentally shipped 5-round Springfield stripper clips to units already holding the new 8-round Garands. The real test came in the South Pacific. 1942. The Guadalcanal Campaign. At first, the Marine Corps stubbornly clung to their old bolt-action rifles out of sheer habit. They walked into the first major Allied offensive carrying the exact same weapons their fathers used in the trenches. Then they finally took the new rifle into the firing line. The mud did not break it. The jungle did not jam the action. After the first bloody firefights, the surviving Marines fiercely demanded more of the new rifles. While Marines on Guadalcanal praised their brutal new firepower, Japanese infantry paid for that discovery in blood. The Imperial commanders made a deadly miscalculation. They actually believed every American squad hid multiple heavy machine guns in the brush. The reality was just 8 rounds of rapid fire from every single rifleman. A standard banzai charge began with drawn swords and fanatic screams. Soldiers sprinted blindly through the thick jungle. Halfway to the American trenches, they hit a solid wall of lead. The charge simply choked in the mud. Chinese troops never delivered this kind of overwhelming density. The American rifle shattered the bayonet wave before it even reached the wire. So where did the myth of an all-submachine gun Wehrmacht actually come from? Exclusively from slick newsreels and staged propaganda. When American boys first clashed with German forces during Operation Torch in November 1942, they faced a completely different reality. Forget the cinematic illusion of a mechanized super army. Picture 14 million old bolt-action Kar 98 rifles. German factories manufactured them between 1934 and 1945. Heavy wood and manual steel. The industry produced only 1.1 million MP-40 submachine guns. The math was merciless. Most young German recruits marched into the fire holding the exact same weapon their fathers gripped while rotting in the trenches of the First World War. This created a fatal tactical flaw. German combat doctrine obsessed over the MG-34 and the legendary MG-42. These machine guns devoured ammunition. The average German rifleman was not an independent shooter. He was glorified logistics. His only real job was hauling heavy ammo belts to feed the gun. He took bullets simply to protect the belt. Americans built their squads around the lethal independence of the individual rifleman. Germans turned their infantry into mere servants for a machine gun. The system worked perfectly on paper, but the battlefield exposed its brutal cost. If the gun jammed or the gunner died, the entire squad collapsed. One-on-one, the German lost. While American and German troops bled in North Africa, Moscow had already made its move. Back in 1940, the Soviet Union tried to arm its front with a new semi-automatic rifle, the SVT-40. It looked brilliant on paper, a 10-round magazine, heavy firepower. But paper does not shoot in freezing mud. The rifle was a diva. It demanded perfect ammunition. It demanded constant care. A terrified farm boy in the trenches simply could not provide that. Soviet tests revealed a brutal truth. The weapon had a 10% failure rate. The American Garand jammed only 1.75% of the time. In a trench fight, that math was fatal. At the most critical moment of the battle, every 10th Soviet conscript found himself holding a completely useless piece of cold iron. His rifle choked. The enemy did not. London saw this complexity trap early on. Back in 1939, the British military examined the Garand. They wanted that firepower. But switching factories meant stopping the assembly lines for months. Survival dictated terms. They could not afford a single day of downtime. They kept the old Lee Enfield. The Soviets eventually learned the same harsh lesson. They ripped the capricious semi-automatics out of their infantry's hands. To save the collapsing front, the empire rolled back to something maximally cheap and hopelessly primitive. The old Mosin bolt-action rifle. No delicate parts, no gas tubes, just crude metal and wood that worked even in shaking hands. Mass production demanded a gun a drafted peasant could master in an hour. By the end of the war, a desperate Japan tried to steal the American formula. They engineered the Type 4, a blatant clone of the Garand. But their industry was already burning. They needed millions of rifles to stop the bleeding. Their dying factories managed to assemble exactly 250. While the Soviets traded complex automatics for cheap bolt actions, the Germans stubbornly tried to outsmart physics. Army bureaucrats handed their engineers a categorical ban: do not drill gas ports in the barrel. To trap gas without drilling steel, designers stuck a complicated cone on the muzzle. It was an engineering disaster. Every shot packed that muzzle trap with caustic black powder. Carbon residue turned into thick sludge. Tiny metal components locked up solid after just a few shots in the mud. The weapon choked. They built roughly 120,000 of these G41 failures. Why did the G43 appear so late? The entire industry of the Reich was already bursting at the seams trying to rivet tanks. By October 1943, Command finally caved and copied a working Soviet design. The G43 hit the lines. But German factories were already suffocating from resource starvation. Workers desperately slapped together cheap, fragile stamped metal parts. They squeezed out barely 400,000 units. Across the ocean, American assembly lines pumped out 5,400,000 Garands. That was an industrial abyss that no dark German genius could ever close. German factories lacked the physical capacity to retool for rifles while frantically trying to replace destroyed aircraft and burning armor. While German factories choked, the American rifle that dominated the war became a psychological trap. After firing 4 of his 8 rounds, a soldier found himself helpless before the next dash. How do you reload a half-empty weapon under fire? You do not. The soldier became a hostage to the mechanism. Imagine a guy breathing hard behind a shattered wall. He needs to move. He desperately wants a full clip for the next sprint across open ground. But the gun refuses to cooperate. He attempts the official method. Shaking fingers frantically try to shove single rounds down into a half-empty clip under enemy fire. It requires 2 hands. It takes too much time. It gets men killed. The alternative meant throwing good ammunition away. A guy would rip the bolt back to manually eject the half-empty clip. You could hear the sharp ring of unused live bullets tumbling directly into the mud. A standard detachable box magazine would have fixed this instantly, but Army generals ignored the reality of the trenches. That basic innovation did not reach the infantry until the military adopted the M14 in 1959. So the men on the ground adapted to the absurdity. A soldier simply aimed his rifle at nothing and pulled the trigger, blasting his remaining ammunition into empty space just to force the gun open. But dumping good brass into the dirt was a minor annoyance compared to the real punishment. The true cost of the rifle was dragging around 11 pounds of solid steel and dense wood. Take the M7 grenade launcher. A soldier slipped the simple metal tube over the muzzle, locked it to the bayonet lug, chambered a special blank cartridge. But there was a catch. The adapter completely shut off the gas system. The prized semi-automatic weapon instantly became a clumsy single-shot rifle. A soldier fired the grenade. Then he racked the stiff handle manually, every single time. It gave the squad extra reach, but it made an already massive weapon incredibly awkward to handle in a firefight. Weight was the ultimate enemy. A loaded Garand with a leather sling and a fixed bayonet tipped the scales at over 11 pounds. 11 pounds. Today, armies hand that kind of weight to a guy carrying a modern light machine gun. Back then, it was just a standard personal weapon. A radio man sprinted through brush while a massive block of steel smashed into his collarbone. An artillery observer climbed a muddy ridge, fighting gravity and a weapon that constantly pulled him backward. The brass behind the desks knew all this. Pre-war Army ordnance reports flat out admitted the Garand was too heavy and cumbersome for support staff. The men in the field complained constantly. Headquarters simply ignored them. Generals knew the troops were breaking their backs. A lighter alternative existed. The M1 carbine was designed specifically so support troops wouldn't be crushed by their own gear. A frontline infantryman suffered with over 11 pounds of steel, while a soldier with a carbine carried exactly 5.2. The guys in the mud begged for a lighter load. The generals didn't listen. In 1959, the brass finally replaced the Korean War veteran Garand. They handed the infantry the new M14. The punchline? It was actually heavier and longer than the rifle it replaced. The Pentagon demanded a bureaucratic miracle. They wanted one weapon to do the job of 4 different guns. Engineers built it around the massive 7.62 by 51 NATO cartridge. They slapped in a detachable 20-round magazine. They added a selector switch for fully automatic fire. On paper, it looked unstoppable. In the real world, it became a death trap. Then came Vietnam. The traditional wooden stock soaked up the heavy Asian humidity like a sponge. The wood swelled. The action warped. The heavy rifle sat sticky with sweat in a soldier's hands, completely killing any chance at precision. Combat in the jungle was a brutal, close-quarters nightmare. Thick foliage choked the battlefield. Firefights rarely stretched beyond 300 meters. The Viet Cong moved fast. They carried the AK-47. They dumped 30 rounds of smooth, controllable automatic fire into the brush, holding absolute superiority in an ambush. The American infantryman had 20 rounds and a rifle fighting him every step of the way. He flipped the selector to full auto. He pulled the trigger. The monstrous recoil violently slammed his shoulder. The weapon fiercely ripped itself out of alignment. 2 quick shots, and the heavy barrel was just jerking uncontrollably into the sky. You cannot win a close-range jungle war with an unmanageable cannon. The stubborn generals finally swallowed their pride and scrambled to issue the radically different M16, chambered for the tiny 5.56 NATO round. The M14 survived a mere 11 or 12 years in frontline service, recording the shortest lifespan of any standard infantry rifle in American history. While American kids bled in the jungle, holding the massive M14, the bitter truth was simple. The perfect infantry weapon already existed. Who first realized the era of heavy rifles was dead? The Germans, back on the battlefields of the Second World War. They actually analyzed their firefights. Most infantry kills happened under 300 meters. Firing heavy, full-power rounds at that close distance was pure overkill. So they engineered the 7.92 by 33 Kurz, a short, stubby brass case. It instantly slashed the violent recoil. It shaved off the dead weight. They fed this new intermediate cartridge into the STG-44. The tactical math was brutal and absolutely undeniable. Decades later, adopting a tiny caliber like the 5.56 changed the rules of war. A modern soldier could suddenly carry 210 rounds into combat. The exact same physical gear weight previously limited him to just 100. More bullets simply meant survival. By the 1980s, every major military on the planet quietly copied this exact German philosophy. But the United States military brass rejected this reality for decades. They stubbornly clung to their old traditions. March 28, 1944. The Oval Office. President Roosevelt smiles broadly. He hands John Garand the Medal for Merit, a firm, respectful handshake for the genius engineer. It was the highest civilian honor in the country. Roosevelt praised the man who gave American troops their winning edge. But at that exact second, German soldiers on the front lines were already pulling the triggers on intermediate rifles. They were burying his heavy caliber concept forever. Roosevelt shook his hand.